Hey folks, my name's Rene Enriquez and you are watching Uncensored.
This is Rene Enriquez. Nickname Bootser. Black Hand of the Mexican Mafia. Prison gang politics.
Hey folks, my name's Rene Enriquez and you are watching Uncensored. Well, wanted to change the pace a little bit, but we also wanted to bring you a humdinger. So this is a humdinger. It's food for thought. Really food for thought. Because a lot's going on, right? A lot's going on with the organizations in the California Department of Corrections. Now, there's a peace accord. We all know about that. We're going to cover that in a second. But there's long history between the Nuestra Familia and the Mexican Mafia. A lot of animosity exists with the Nuestra Familia. I mean, let's face reality. They were oppressed. They were victimized. And that's the reality. They struck back. They struck back. And we're going to get into that because I promised you Death Row Joe. And we're going to talk about how they struck back in that Death Row Joe piece. But there is animosity. It's deep-seated and it's well-deserved because the Mexican Mafia was victimizing people. Everybody knows that the Mexican Mafia was victimizing Northern California inmates, even its own. In fact, that's why a majority of the founders of the NF were Sureños. That was before the term Sureños existed, but there were dudes like that I knew that were Sureños, and then there were Nuestra Familia. People just didn't like how the Mexican Mafia got down, and that resentment runs deep still. It runs deep. I think even Sureños today feel that. But let's talk about this existing agreement to end hostilities. Notice the phrase agreement to end hostilities, right? Because in 2000, year 2000, after the Pelican Bay riots, a group of us, I've talked about this before in other episodes, walked the entire shoe in Pelican Bay State Prison. It was myself, Jaco Padilla, and Danny Peña, and we approached the Nuestra Familia leadership. Like Guete was there, Pinky, all those guys were there. They were there, and we spoke to them. In fact, they didn't want to participate. They refused to come to the table to talk about peace. And the only thing that resolved from that whole thing was the door policy, right? Because back in that day, cops were intentionally popping doors and setting off fights between Nuestra Familia, Mexican Mafia, AB, BGF, everybody. It was entertainment to them at Pelican Bay, and it was done on purpose. We know that. We know that. So the only thing that come out of that, although they refused to participate in this peace talk, right? Because the Mexican Mafia literally did not need peace. It didn't need peace, and that's the truth. But it was beneficial to all the organizations to come to an agreement in order to achieve release from the shoe, because that was the ultimate goal, get out of the shoe. But the NF did not want to talk about it. They pushed away from the table. In fact, they refused to participate. They didn't acknowledge membership to the administration. And we went straight out and, hey, we're Mexican Mafia, and this is AB, and this is BGF, and we're going to bring about peace throughout the state. But they were adamant about the word peace. There's going to be no peace. And I remember that distinctly. I remember that. I remember that myself and Danny Boy and Chaco were at the door, and it was respectful. It was a respectful exchange. But their main concern was the recent indictments that were occurring at the time. Because of the indictments, they didn't want to incriminate themselves in anything. So I remember that initiated in 2002. Years later, there was this group of individuals, right? And this is after the initial hunger strikes, right? These individuals organized a statewide hunger strike that went actually to a couple different countries. There's Dewberry, there's Todd Ashker, there's Tablas Castellanos, there's Antonio Guillen, I think this is an NF representative, and George. I don't know who this guy is. I don't know what group he represents, but these are the figureheads in the prisoners' rights movement when they kicked off that big hunger strike after Todd Ashker filed that lawsuit against the CDC. But before that, there was a hunger strike. It was the idea of Steve Castillo. Steve Castillo was the guy who came up with the concept to participate in a nonviolent protest in order to bring awareness to the atrocities of the shoe. I remember I was there in the pod with him, and I hated it. I did not like Steve because he had Jocko's ear, and he kept pumping in all this ridiculous stuff into his head. And Jocko thought he was the best thing since sliced bread. In fact, Jocko wanted to sponsor Steve Castillo in the organization. Steve had never picked up a knife, didn't do anything. He was not a killer. And Jocko wanted to sponsor him into the organization. And I told Jocko flat out, never. I told him never, ever will that guy be made. That's it. That dude's a Poindexter. All he does is write writs for everybody. And that I could not make. So that's where the original concept came from in the hunger strikes. And they had it for 5 days. And I remember telling Steve Castillo, like, hey, dude, are you serious about it? And in fact, if you're so serious about this hunger strike, you do it, and then once you die, then somebody else will pick up the flag and start a hunger strike. And then when that person dies, somebody else will pick it up. That will bring attention, but Steve bowed out immediately. Like, it's not about that. No. But years later, Ashker files litigation in Ashker versus Brown, in which I was an expert consultant for Governor Brown, and is successful. This litigation brought the CDC to its knees. We all know about this. I'm not trying to rehash old stuff, but it brought the CDC to its knees because world media had latched onto this because the wives and the girlfriends effectively utilized social media and mainstream media. This was perfectly done. You got to give these guys credit, right? A bunch of guys in the shoe, no formal educations, want to make a statement, and they did, and they were successful, and they became the faces of the movement. So we get that, right? So let's talk about the agreement to end hostilities. It's a historic inmate-led declaration of peace, and I think the NF would have issue with that word peace because they don't agree to peace. Declaration that went into effect on October 10th, 2012 across the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation System. Drafted by Short Corridor Prisoners Collective at Pelican Bay State Prison, it aimed to end decades of racial violence and division among incarcerated people. Key aspects of the agreement: cessation of violence. The document officially called for all hostilities and violence between racial and ethnic groups to stop in all state prisons, security housing units, administrative segregation, and county jails. Diplomatic dispute resolution. It mandated that if personal issues arose between individuals, they must be settled using diplomatic means rather than escalating into group or racial conflicts. Resistance to CDCR tactics. The organizers recognized that the prison system's power heavily relied on a divide and conquer strategy and urged inmates to unite around shared rights and rehabilitation instead of attacking each other. Background and legacy. The agreement to end hostilities emerged from massive statewide hunger strikes organized by prisoners protesting indefinite solitary confinement and gang validation policies. By declaring peace, prisoner leaders dismantled the CDCR's primary justification for keeping them locked in solitary confinement as the worst of the worst, ultimately leading to a landmark legal settlements such as Ashker versus Governor of California that reformed the CDCR solitary confinement and gang validation systems. The agreement is still widely recognized and upheld by advocates and inmates' rights groups as a foundational pillar of prisoner solidarity in California. So you can read the full text, it's online. But this is true. I mean, the CDCR created the SHU to isolate people, and it divided people. The SHU was created to break men, and that's really what it did. It almost broke the organization. A lot of people don't recognize that fact, that the organization the Mexican Mafia was at war with itself during the short corridor programs and the shoe program. I remember that specifically. The organization was fraught with politics, infighting, Mexican Mafia members checking in, paranoia and distrust ran thick in the organization. And that's because the CDC had strategized to isolate people and turn them against each other. That's the reality of what the CDC did. Pelican Bay was meant to break men, as were all isolation units, right? Now, I'm not agreeing that CDCR or those units were successful in that, right? In some degrees, yes, the organization began fighting with itself and almost destroyed itself. Had the shoe isolation unit still been in effect today, 15 years later, I dare say that the organization would be nowhere near as powerful as it is, because it served its purpose, and Mexican Mafia members were engaged in deep politics. And I don't know about the AB, I don't know about the BGF, and I don't know about the NF, but I know it was effective towards the Mexican Mafia, right? And there are some personalities that are more resilient that can handle isolation over long periods of time. And it wasn't the isolation that affected most individuals. It was the politics that broke those individuals. So let's get that clear right now. The shoe proper did not break individuals. It's the dysfunctional behavior that emerged during that isolation that affected so many people. So that said, we know about the agreement. It went down. They were successful. You got to take your hats to those guys. They were successful. But the agreement to end hostilities began when we came to the open door policy, right? We called it the door policy. And we walked around during those peace talks and agreed to it. It was, if the door's open, do not challenge, stand your ground. That was it. If you were challenged, then go for it, right? Because the cops were popping doors all day long. And that was a great policy. Even if there was never peace among all the organizations, men were getting life sentences and getting shot from merely engaging in fisticuffs on the tier. That's how serious it got in Pelican Bay State Prison. And the cops would do it on a regular basis. There was always an alarm going off because a cop popped the wrong door or did it intentionally. So that, it was done for the benefit of the prisoners, not for the cops, not for anybody else, just for the prisoners. Everybody recognized that the cops were doing it on purpose. And I don't know anybody that would agree with the cop setup. I remember they did it with Anthony Bono, one of the Hillside Stranglers. They put him in a room with us at Folsom State Prison. We used to get contact visits in Folsom. And it was me, Widow Shy, and Negro Villalba. They put us in a room with the Hillside Strangler, and they left us there for almost half hour. And we knew what they wanted. I saw Anthony Bono's eyes, and he was terrified. But we understood what the cops were doing. They wanted us to take him out, and we didn't. I even told them, "Hey, don't worry. We're not going to do anything to you. We know what the cops are doing." Because that's the kind of mentality, real convicts had. That, like, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do this for the cops. We're not going to do the cops' bidding, right? And that's what the door policy was about. It was about inmates. This is on a bigger level, right? The agreement came, and it was successful. The NF has made it clear that this is not a peace treaty. It is not a peace treaty. They will not use that word peace, right? In fact, there was a kite intercepted that the NF said that this by no means is a peace treaty. They named the Mexican Mafia their enemies. They remember the victimization of the organization and how the Mexican Mafia stepped on their necks. And they agreed to program. And the kite says, although we agreed to program, we will do so only until it is not beneficial to us. So in my mind, that means the NF has hostilities. They recognize that this is an opportunity for them, because the NF was dwindling, and hence the creation of the Nuestra Raza. And just a heads up, folks, it's never been called NS, or Northern Structure. It was Nuestra Raza, right? The NF created the NR because they had no ability to control general population yards. Kind of like the Mexican Mafia created the mesas. Kind of the same thing. But I am not an expert in the NF, so don't take me as an expert. I just know what I know, right? I this is common knowledge stuff, right? But the Nuestra Familia, to this day, considers the Mexican Mafia its enemies. That's clear. It's been intercepted in CDC communications between Nuestra Familia members. There are documented instances where this has been captured. And then there's Skip, right? So the NF is on the main line with the Mexican Mafia, right? And they agreed to be there, but they will not call it a peace treaty. They call it an end to hostilities or a cessation in the violence, because they don't see the Mexican Mafia as their allies, and they don't see the Mexican Mafia as their friends. And that's the mentality of the Nuestra Familia, an organization that has suffered major losses against the organization. And I know that people are I mean, I get a couple comments every time I do one of these videos. It's a lie that the Mexican Mafia only killed, that the Nuestra Familia only killed one NF member, but it's the truth. You know, I heard, actually read a comment that Acha was killed by the NF, and that is not true at all. I went through all the media coverage. We're going to do something on that in a minute, but we're going to address that, because Acha was not killed by the Nuestra Familia. Cheyenne was killed by the Nuestra Familia, and that was a made guy. The guy during the supposed shoe war, and it's not even, it wasn't even called the shoe war. There was no such thing as a shoe war. That's not what it was called, right? And we're going to get into that too, because I promised you Death Row Joe, and we're going to get into all that then. And this is coming right from the sources, from a general, and from the leading experts in the Nuestra Familia. And you know what? The only reason I'm doing this, because it directly relates to the Mexican Mafia, right? I am not an NF expert. I know a lot of NF guys, and I met them, and we're going to do a couple more inclusions of people that I knew in the Nuestra Familia. But I want to focus on this topic here. If the Mexican Mafia, the predominant prison gang in California, is on a general prison population yard with individuals it has victimized over and over and over again for decades, and is not considered their ally, then what is it doing? And what is the NF doing? That's the real question. What is the motivation of the NF? Is it to enjoy creature comforts, establish money, recruit, gain power? I don't know. I see it as an opportunity, and I'll get to that at the end. But here's Skip Villanueva, right? Skip Villanueva is all over social media. In fact, sending out these missives or filters via social media. He is out there like discussing his opposition to the cessation of violence in the Department of Corrections in California. Skip is in the feds. This is Skip Sheldon Villanueva, and gangster in his own right. You know, some people made negative comments about him on my channel, and I don't invite that. You know, give the man his respect. If he's not a gangster, that will show. But what he's done, you got to give him props for what he's done. There's nothing admirable in being a prison gang member. There really isn't. You know, and I'd say that to any member. I was one, and there's nothing admirable or honorable about it. But he chose to live that life. He's lived it to his fullest. So, you know what? God bless you, Skip. That's what you do. But here's the message that he sends out to his fellow Nuestra Familia members in California. And this is a general in the Nuestra Familia for the federal faction. This came out on Cali Bangin'. And the headline is, one of the leaders of the Nuestra Familia and federal prison system has just released a letter speaking against Sureños and the peace treaty going on in California state prison system. So the letter, here's an excerpt from it, and this is from a validated source. Uninvited, this is Skip's words, right? And I want you to remember, because the Nuestra Familia has always said that it was never victimized by the organization, but the truth is it was. And I don't say that with any bone to pick with my northern brothers, because you know what? I don't play that crap anymore. I have no bone to pick with anybody from anywhere. I really don't. Well, we're covering the historic aspect of this and the conflict within the Nuestra Familia itself. And here you have a leader saying that they've been victimized. The Nuestra Familia has been victimized by the Mexican Mafia. And that's my whole point, right? So here's Skip's words. Uninvited, they preyed upon our young who can no longer live free in their own backyards or go where they choose to. Now they have to go around the scrap. This is the threat and interference I took a stance against 43 years ago and continue to do so. Those invaders seek to take over our property, possessions, and stomp out our identity by force. Their blue writing is in plain view. So I ask, what gives them the right to do this? Who are they? Are we on their land doing this to them? Disrespecting with our feet on their necks? The disappointment is this. While their abuse continues, those in the state system are living a cowardice existence, bowing down and going by blue rules, and in some cases backing them up, vowing to help sewer rats by taking arms up against the padres of the N, the very founders of our raza and union. They slander, lie, and disrespect the very proven warriors that raised the war flag and continue to sacrifice for the cause. Until the sewage leaves our land completely, the war is not over. And this is written by Skip Villanueva, one of the leaders of the NF federal faction. That is filled with vitriol and animosity. There's antipathy in that, right? There's hatred. There's hatred. That's how NF see the Mexican Mafia. But here's the kicker that Skip Villanueva, talking about coexisting with Mexican Mafia members, coexisted on BOP yards at one time with Sureños and Carnales. You know, there's been a lot of comments in the comment section, and I'm not going to expound on that because I don't know the truth of it, but I do know that he was on the yard with Sureños at one time. And it's kind of hypocritical to be at one location and be with Sureños and associates of the Mexican Mafia and do nothing, and now criticize his brothers in California who do the same thing, right? But well, I don't have documented like movement sheets on Skip, so I'm just going to leave it at that, right? That's a known fact. He's been in multiple BOP facilities where there were Sureños and associates on the mainland. But that's the mentality of some of the members in the NF, particularly the federal faction. And I dare say that some in California probably feel the same way. Their family members were victimized, their friends were victimized and eliminated, and that's just a reality. So there has to be a deep-lying animosity by some individuals in the NF, some true believers, some individuals that still believe in their causa, and they insist on calling it not a peace treaty but a cessation of hostilities. And most important, that the NF says straight out, this isn't a peace treaty. The MA are our enemies. They're our sworn enemies. But we agree to coexist with them as long as it suits us to do so. Once it doesn't, then action will be taken. Those are the words in a kite that were intercepted. And I'm paraphrasing, obviously. So what is the objective of the NF? Now, if I was the Nuestra Familia, and I had been victimized like that, or I had been the underdog in a fight for so long, I would wait for the opportune moment. And I think this is the opportune moment where the Mexican Mafia has become lackadaisical, focused solely on money and dope and power, where they're encircled by Nuestra Familia members who can, in one fell swoop, inflict the greatest blow against the organization that has ever been inflicted. I think that at some point is coming. You're seeing the organization, the Mexican Mafia, suffering more and more slights. More people are resisting them. Entire gangs have done it. And here is a sworn enemy, the Nuestra Familia, voicing it. This is leaking out. This is overt. This letter was overt, posted in social media. And the kite within California Department of Corrections, where Nuestra Familia authority is stating that they declare the Mexican Mafia their enemies, and it is not a peace treaty, and will only exist, the current system will only exist as long as it suits the Nuestra Familia in the Department of Corrections in California. That is a red flag. And I'm not trying to advocate anything. I'm not trying to stir the pot. I'm just saying what's real. This is real. This is in front of everybody's eyes. And nobody wants to see it because it's there. It's there. It's an ugly reality that hatred still exists in the hearts of Nuestra Familia towards the Mexican Mafia. And maybe kumbaya in some yards. And some members may get along with other Nuestra Familia members pretty good. But that institutional, ingrained animosity and antipathy for the organization has been created over the past 60 years. And how do you rid it? With a spread, or sharing clavo, or going to business together. That doesn't rid the heartfelt scars and the trauma that this organization has experienced from the Mexican Mafia. It just doesn't. That's food for thought, folks. That's real food for thought on a Friday. And I want to promise you, Death Row Joe, he's coming. We got some unprecedented stuff. And I'm teasing you. I really am teasing you. But that's the way it is, folks. You don't get what you want all the time. I gave you periquito a couple times this week. So for today, for Friday, you get this. Food for thought. NF, Mexican Mafia. End of hostilities. Will it last? Is there an objective? Is there an objective by the NF to make the Mexican Mafia complacent and then strike? That's the real question. With that said, folks, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Little short, but it's Friday. We're taking a break. Have a great weekend. Peace out.
This is Rene Enriquez. Nickname Boots.